So let's see, Trustee Earhart? Are you online? Okay, Trustee Hassan? Perfect. We're live? Okay, perfect. Welcome, everyone. I would like to call to order the first Governance and Policy Committee meeting for this school year. We'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. If you are able, we ask you to please stand. I would like to call to order. As someone based in Scarborough, I'm operating on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations. This area has been under the care of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and any other nations that may be unrecorded. The territories that encompass Toronto are under a number of treaties, including the Toronto Purchase of 1805, the Williams Treaty, and the Rouge-Tract Claim submitted in 2015. Conversations around the Toronto Purchase Treaty began in 1787, and settlement between the Government of Canada and the Mississaugas of the Credit were only reached in 2010. This took more than 200 years due to lack of guarantee of land rights, inclusion of Indigenous voice, and proper financial compensation. This is important to highlight as it shows how slow justice has been for Indigenous communities. I'd like to acknowledge my settler privilege and extend my solidarity to Indigenous communities whose land I continue to benefit from. Many of us came here as settlers, immigrants, or refugees. I would also like to acknowledge those who came here involuntarily as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. I'd like to welcome committee members Trustee Earhart, Trustee Hassan, Trustee Nanziata, and Trustee Sriskandarajah. In the room, we are joined by Trustee McLean, and I'd ask if any trustees are joining us online to please let us know.
Trustee Williams here.
Good evening, Trustee King is here.
Trustee Chernes-Lynn, I think I'm ex officio as well, a voting member.
Dawson here as well.
Dennis Hastings here.
Welcome, everyone. Next, we'll have the approval of the agenda. I'd like to also make aware that we have, in addition to the agenda, there is a notice of motion from Trustees De Davidas and Trustee Hassan regarding Latin American Heritage Month that's up for notice of motion. May I get a mover and seconder for the approval of the agenda?
Trustee Hassan.
Chernes-Lynn.
Thank you, Trustee Hassan and Trustee Chernes-Lynn. All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, seeing none. We'll have declarations of possible conflict of interest next. We'll give a moment for folks to come off mute to share if they have any. Hearing none, we'll move on to staff reports. We do not have any delegations today. So up first, we have the Human Rights Policy Annual Review, and I believe Human Rights System Lead Mahijabeen Abraham will be presenting this.
Good evening, trustees and colleagues. It is my pleasure to bring to you the Human Rights Policy, which establishes our obligation to uphold human rights in the provision of both public education and employment at the Toronto District School Board. In that regard, we have a strong policy that establishes a framework, including accountabilities for the work that this board does. The policy provides both our framework for a culture of human rights and also the authority to address policy violations, both human rights violations as well as code-based workplace harassment violations. Two pieces of legislation that shape the work that we do in this area are the Ontario Human Rights Code and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. I bring to you a policy with the necessary housekeeping changes. It is following a expedited process to make sure that we're on track in terms of any frameworks that we need to adopt as we address both human rights code violations as well as code-based workplace harassment complaints. I request that this policy be approved so we can continue to advance human rights and address code-based workplace harassment at the Toronto District School Board. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, and we'll see if there are any questions from trustees at this moment. Okay, seeing none, we'll open the vote for approval of staff recommendations.
We need a move on a second.
I can move. Trustee Shan.
Now, Trustee Nunziato was second.
Thank you. We have trustees Shan and Nunziata. I'm in favor.
Ernest Lynn in favor.
Shan in favor.
Raj in favor.
Trustee Nunziata in favor.
He voted in favor. Oh, it was in favor as well. So we have trustees Shan, Chernoslin, Sriskandarajah, Nunziata in favor, and that has passed. Okay, next on the agenda, we have the policy review schedule for 23-24. And I believe speaking to this will be Associate Editor Pon.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to present to the committee a report on a proposed policy review schedule. And with that, I will pass it over to Vitaly Plotnikov, Policy Coordinator, to just guide us through the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director. Good evening, everyone. Madam Chair, the report that we're presenting today is the policy review schedule for 23-24, 27-28 school years. It's a 5-year cycle report, and we'll explain why it is 5 years. We present policy review schedules to the board on annual basis for review and approval. Typically, the cycle that we followed was 4 years. And as I mentioned, this year, we are recommending to extend the cycle to 5 years. The policy review schedule provides the roadmap for review and development of policies at the TDSB. So we have a list of documents that staff and trustees would be focusing this school year and the following 4 years. Currently, TDSB has 81 policies and 168 operational and governance procedures that support implementation of these policies. So the report in front of you includes 2 appendices. One is a list of completed projects that were implemented during the last school year. So if you look at the Appendix A, you will see the list of projects, 34 projects. We completed 12 policy review and developments, and the remaining are operational and governance procedures. We would like to talk a little bit about challenges that we are facing with the current 4-year cycle. It turned out, and it's not been just this year, but continuously for the last several years, it's been extremely challenging to implement policy reviews, scheduled policy reviews on 4-year cycle. And there are several reasons. Some of them are kind of external in nature, like, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic that essentially paused policy review process for almost a year, or at least a good portion of that year. But there are other system-based reasons that we would like to talk about. On one hand, we have very high number of policies. We have 81 policies, and if you apply simple math to do policy reviews, all of them in 4 years, it's roughly 20 policies per year. I believe we have 7 GPC meetings scheduled. I'm not saying that this is the bottleneck, but it also contributes to the challenge. So 20 policies plus, in addition to that, we typically have to, not typically, but on annual basis, we have to go through annual reviews, which is roughly 4 or 5 policies. Plus, in addition to that, due to government directions, legislative requirements, board resolutions, there are new policies to be developed. So all of that adds to the kind of workload, and at the same time, there is little way to predict which or how many new policies would be added to the annual list. Number and complexity of TDSB policies is continuously growing. In 2015, we had 74 active policies. During this time, since 2015, we rescinded 10 policies. But at the same time, we developed 17. So currently it's 81. And just think about this, to develop 17 policies, it's essentially an annual workload. So it was added to this cycle without us even knowing that it will happen. Rescission as well, you have to review policies and see which components of the policies could be just rescinded and which should be moved to other policies. So it's a process, it's analysis, it's a lot of work on everyone to do that. And it's kind of in addition to those regular cycle. I've mentioned that on top of that, we also get requests or legislative requirements in terms of development of new policies. There is no restriction in the current policy review and development process on in-year additions. On one hand, we cannot, if it's something that is required by the legislation, there is no way for us to avoid that. But on the other hand, as I said, there is we don't have a good way to predict all of them, the workload. So as a result, the annual completion rate of for policy reviews has been roughly from 36% to 95%, averaging around 60%. We've made a good progress in terms of updating and reviewing our policies. So in the report, you can see this little table that outlines very outdated policies, and in terms of percentage, it's a small percentage. And as I said, we've made a good progress in terms of updating policies, and therefore policies with 5 up to 10 years, they are absolute majority on our list. So staff, executives, and staff have been working on strategies to improve the policy review process. So there are several kind of actions that are being developed and contemplated. One of them is introduction of this new strategic policy advisory model, where there will be a very tight interaction between policy services and policy owners, associate directors, executives. We will develop kind of planning and escalation process, refine the steps that are in existence but perhaps need some advancement. There will be additional measures taken in terms of communication of the policies and making sure that associated procedures are also highlighted during this process and kind of constitute part of the policy review process. At the same time, we are working on review of the policy development and management procedure, which is a governance procedure, PR 501, which outlines the process, which explains the process for policy reviews and development. So we're working on that procedure to streamline the process, to kind of make it more efficient and effective. And we're planning to bring recommendations to trustees at some point, probably early next year. So as I mentioned, we are proposing a 5-year cycle for the policy review schedule. And as part of kind of considering that proposal, we did a quick scan of several school boards, in fact, I believe 13 school boards. And majority of the school boards, not a huge majority, but significant majority, they are on 5-year cycle. Others on 4-year cycle, as us. I think one board that we scanned indicated that they would review their policies on a regular basis, which is not quite clear what that means. So the policy review schedule, the 5-year policy review schedule, is provided for your attention in Appendix B. We are recommending to focus, on one hand, just kind of to reiterate and mention what we always highlight when we bring the policy review schedules. The policy review schedule reflects the priorities of the board, multi-year strategic plan, government, Ministry of Education directives, PPMs, legislative requirements. So all of that is built in the policy review schedule. So we're not deviating from that. And the proposed schedule is consistent with that. At the same time, we are proposing to continue and focus on the policies that are still in progress, meaning the reviews and development have been initiated in the previous year. And we would like to continue on that in order to be able to reduce and eliminate the backlog that has been accumulated in the last several years. I would like to mention that although we're proposing as a default 5-year cycle, there will be a mechanism to escalate. On one hand, every policy in the evaluation section states that this policy will be reviewed as required or at least once in 4, and now we can say in 5 years. So there is always a way to initiate review of the policy as required. And we would like to highlight that with this proposed method and new cycle, 5-year cycle, we will have more flexibility to address priorities and move policies up on the schedule as required when board feels that certain policies need to be escalated or expedited in terms of review. We are working, as I mentioned, on the review of the PR 501 policy management development and management procedure. So we're thinking that criteria for policies that would perhaps be on a shorter term, we are thinking we will prepare those criteria and bring to trustees for consideration as part of this PR 501 review. I would like just quickly mention benefits. We feel that there are significant benefits in switching to this 5-year cycle. Establishing more manageable and realistic policy review expectations. As I said, with 60% completion rate, it's very hard to manage those expectations. Achieving review targets with the policy review schedule, reducing and eliminating backlog of outstanding policy reviews. I think I mentioned that. Expediting review and development of operational and governance procedures to support implementation of government policies. As I mentioned, we have 168 procedures that support those policies. So staff requires time and resources to make sure that procedures are properly aligned with the governing policies. And we would be able to respond more effectively to board's policy priorities. And as I said, better manage expectations. So the policy review schedule has been considered by Executive Council on September 26th. And now it's presented for your consideration and hopefully approval. Thank you. Back to you, Ms. Pond.
Thank you very much, Vitaly. I will just want to add a few more things. As Vitaly has mentioned, we are now trying to address the backlog that has accumulated over the last few years. Staff need time to do this work. Right now, the pace of the work, the amount of work, and some additional things like real requests, for example, right now it's not sustainable, it's not supporting effective governance. So our ultimate objective really is to make sure that we carve out the time that's necessary for the significant policy matters that you need to focus on. In our view, the switch to from a 4 to a 5-year cycle is actually relatively minor, considering we're not even meeting the 4-year cycle at this point in time. Is there a possibility of reverting it in the future? Yes, but we do need the time to make sure we catch up. I should also note that we do have some matters that require annual review that is not required by law, but was by direction of the board. For example, the disconnect from work and the flexible work policies. Annual reviews for the first 4 years, and the last time we were here at GPC, there really was no changes of substance. So those are some of the things that we probably need to take another wholesale look at. As Vitaly Plotnikov mentioned, there is an ability to remove or shorten the timeline for specific policies. So there may be some policies that really can stand the test of time and don't need regular review. There are others that need more immediate attention. And also, when we take a look at the other things that the board does, not only policies, but it's also procedures, other reports, changes in Ministry of Education direction, law or regulation, and of course, certain special reports. For example, the Human Rights Office report is delivered multiple times per year. So ultimately, our goal is to support the work of the entire Board of Trustees to be able to spend the time on primary or key procedures. These adjustments, plus some other adjustments that we're planning to do, as Vitaly highlighted, and there's some other things that we're working on as well, which we'll bring back at a near future GPC meeting. All this to say that it is our desire to make sure that we can devote the time necessary to make the work done properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Policy Coordinator Plotnikov and Associate Director Pron. We do have a few questions from trustees. We'll begin with Trustee Shan. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I do want to know currently, is there a mechanism of identifying different levels of priorities within the policies? Is all 80 plus policies considered to be the same in this procedure? Or are there policies that are coded as high priority, medium priority, or low priority in terms of reviews?
Through the chair, the policy team is working on a standard set of criteria that would help identify the medium, high, and the other types of priorities. We kind of have that currently in our policies procedures. However, we want to be able to flesh that out. Of course, the final criteria will be determined by the board. Certainly, this will definitely come back. And through that, we will be able to, and again, make adjustments throughout the year if necessary. But this is just our beginning point. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Is there currently a place where trustees are able to go to look at all 81 in a bit of a general scan around where the policy review cycles are in a user-friendly manner? Or like, for example, I log into this place, the policies are listed, there's a bit of a infograph type thing that shows where the cycles are, when the introductions are, and when things are being reviewed. And second part of that question is, are these policies clustered in any categories generally, or are they being separated out right now? Is there a categorization of these policies under certain thematic ways?
Through the chair, I'll just answer one of the questions, and then I'll ask Vitaly Plotnikov about the clustering or the methodology currently. Part of the work that I'm doing with the policy services team is to develop tools that help improve implementation of policies and infographics, more built-out communications plans, and other pieces, for example, summaries, let's say, all part of the kind of wholesale work that we're working on right now. We haven't done a significant review of the policy review policy, I guess, in a long time. And I think it's now that we've had several years of working through 60% achievement rates, I think it's time that we take a very harsh and fresh new look at the way we're doing things and organizing our work. Maybe, Vitaly, if you don't mind speaking to how the methodology in the groupings and the years in which the policies are spread out. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director. Through you, Madam Chair. So in terms of policy review schedule, we did not have any clustering, but our website allows for selection of policies by subject, by area. We are working on updating that website, as well as introducing another sorting selection functions. For example, you would be able to see policies by organizational units, in addition to this subject selection. The policy review schedule, once approved, is posted on the public website, and it includes information on the reviews cycle, on the status, current status. We also typically add another column to the schedule where we are able to identify specific dates for GPC meetings once we are becoming aware of those dates. So we include that information as well, so all members of the public could see when certain policies are heading towards GPC. We also include links to the policy review process flowchart, the similar policy review process and policy development process flowcharts that you have in your typical GPC agenda at the end of the document. But as Associate Director Pong mentioned, we are working on improvement of both the website and the way of presenting documents. So on one hand, to make them more user-friendly and more kind of informative. Thank you.
Through the chair, if I can just add, when reviewing myself and EC the proposed schedule, there's some adjustments that have been made according to whether a matter is outdated and we want to maybe move that up in the cycle and not wait another 4 or 5 years. Or if something has been recently reviewed, then we can defer a little later. But what we did not want to do is have themes. So year 1 is human rights related, for example, and year 2 is business related. I think it would not serve the board properly to do what some maybe not non-priority policies in a year in which we really need to address them. So again, when we develop the criteria and bring it back to the GPC committee, we can certainly refine them if indeed themes or certain categories are maybe set for a 3-year cycle or something like that. But by default, we need a default type of cycle to really ensure every single policy has gone through a review within a period of time. Really, it's not to limit the review, it's really to make sure that we capture all of them within a period of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I have a few concerns. One, I think first concern for me is that trustees are elected in a 4-year cycle, and we know that Toronto District School Board has had tremendous amount of turnover in terms of trustees, and last election we saw more than half of the trustees on the board are coming in new, which is going to be the reality for multiple reasons. So I think having a 4-year cycle helps each trustee from a term to be engaged in policy making, as policy making and policy development is one critical function, one of the major critical functions of trustees as a policy governance type board. So that's one concern. The second thing is that I wasn't expecting a clustering of a team for 1 full year, but there are some policies that are connected to each other that could be reviewed together in the interest of time. That also makes trustees plan their questions and get a sense, because if there are 81 policies and when one policy comes to review, there might be 2 or 3 that are technically subsidiaries of that type of policies that can come together and speed up and also give a bit more comprehensive view on this. So, and then the third piece in terms of communication and in terms of helping trustees who are, traditionally many of us are part-time, having a bit of a overarching ways of organizing these policy reviews will help us plan better, and it also helps us communicate better to the community, because this is also not just about trustee involvement, but also having more diverse participation of parents and guardians and family members and caregivers and students and staff be engaged in coming to make deputations around reviews and so on. So sometimes it's difficult to plan it if we don't have a bit of a comprehensive understanding of how things are going to be reviewed. The other piece to this is like when we are making these policy changes, and then what gets communicated out to the community after changes are made is also critical. So I'm just a bit concerned for multiple reasons. I would support a move to a 5-year cycle if there was some sort of prioritization that is possible, some sort of categorization that's possible. Some policies may not even need to be reviewed 5 years. Some might even be just more of a rubber stamp process, but there might be some policies that might need to come in early. I know there was provisions that was mentioned by Associate Director around and staff around bringing policies as needed, but every time we talk about things, we are often told that it's part of a cycle, it's coming out a later time. So it's not as easy as we say to bring something forward. And so keeping in mind the dynamic nature of some of the circumstances that prompt policy review, we might need a clear process as to how a policy could be brought to an urgency and what does it look like. How do trustees bring that forward? Would be clear. If it would be clear, then I think there might be more support for pushing it to 5 years. So I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Through the chair, if I can just, first of all, thank you for all the detailed feedback. I do appreciate the concerns. Right now, we're not meeting the 4-year period. In some cases, we're not even meeting a 6-year period. So what we are looking to do is when we develop draft criteria, that the priority ones, whichever you guys want, are set on a shorter cycle, like 4-year, for example. In terms of the clustering, I agree with you. I think we certainly need to cluster. For example, the policy on workplace violence is dealt with separately in a different cycle than the policy on workplace harassment, even though it's both emanating from the same provision, under the same legislation. We can probably cluster flexible work and disconnect from work. There are of course, many other policies and procedures that we can certainly cluster, and we will certainly take that back. And I think it's an excellent idea. Managing the policy process and just addressing, dealing with the constituents and getting the communications out. That's also part of one of the objectives that we are looking at, making sure that this process is a lot more simpler, easier to manage as it relates to the work that trustees have to do in speaking with their communities. You mentioned about needing a comprehensive approach when dealing with just certain policy decisions. Again, our ultimate goal is to make that part a lot easier for trustees. In order to do that, we need to carve out some time, catch up, and do that. So hopefully, pulling out the ones that can be put on a 4-year cycle will help address the concern that we won't be able to deal with it within a term of a trustee, and the ones that don't really require much change or thought can be at the default 5-year cycle. Thank you.
And we have a growing speakers list. So we have Trustee Arts, Trustee Dawson, Trustee Nunziata, Trustee Hastings, and Trustee Earhart. Trustee Arts, please go ahead.
Hi. Thank you for you, Madam Chair. Thank you to staff for the update. I just having been through the review process for many years, or since the cycle started, I think 4 years was overly ambitious, or very ambitious, and I'm not surprised it's been hard to stick to. We have a lot of policy. Be more reasonable considering our resources and what needs to be reviewed and the amount of consultation we expect, for all our policies. My question is, there is a policy that I see is not coming up for review anytime soon, and I'm sorry, I'm on the go on my way home, so I don't have the previous board motion in front of me to dig up, but I would like someone to check. We adopted a couple of years ago, by ministry directive, we adopted a service animal policy for students. It was handed down, the directive was handed down from the ministry with a really fast timeline to have it implemented, where we didn't have time for consultation, to go out for consultation before it had to be in place. We used, we went off of a template policy that was, I believe, put together by code. But anyway, in the important part being that it was my understanding that we committed to going out to consultation and reviewing that policy within the next year or so. I don't want to be 100% on date, but that we, because we could not go out for consultation before the ministry's deadline, and have the policy in place, that we committed to doing it, in the year after the policy was implemented. And I noticed that that policy has not been reviewed. So I believe it really, by what we adopted as a board, it needs to be pushed up. And I don't know how to do that. It needs it because it never got the consultation piece that it should have. So I don't know how we move that. How will we check on that and move forward with that?
Through the chair, if I can ask Vitaly Plotnikov, if I'm not mistaken, currently is on a cycle for 27-28. However, again, with the criteria that draft criteria that the board will eventually agree on, that can be certainly something that can be moved up. We will, however, look back at our records to see what the board direction was in terms of consultation or or a review shortly after implementation. So we will certainly look into that. If that was a board direction, indeed, we will move forward with that as required. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Up next, we have Trustee Dawson. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair, thanks very much for this report. I'm just I'm wondering if you, and I apologize if this is a redundant question. I had to drop off for a minute there and missed the last part, but I was wondering if staff could please explain what the timeline is for policy approval to when it becomes operationalized. So, for instance, what I'm seeing the school naming policy on here as having been approved. It's not yet been operationalized, but yet the school naming policy is again on the schedule like a few years later. So I just want to understand a little bit what the timing is like for between the final implementation operationally to the next policy review. Thank you.
Through the chair, another great question. Normally in the board report accompanying the draft policy, there is an action plan with the dates. The one for school naming or renaming, I don't have it in front of me, but normally the action plan does set out the implementation. It's quite difficult to set a standard timeline only because some policies require a lot more work investment, in some cases financial investment. Others are, especially if it's just a renewal, it won't require any time whatsoever. So for that one in particular, it would be looking back at the report to see what it says in terms of the implementation plan. We do recognize, and we are being realistic, that in many cases we are not implementing it on as set out in an action plan. A number of things lead to delays. Staff turnover, for example, is another issue. Lack of funding is often, or tight funding, I should say, is often an issue. And there are a number of things, but that's no excuse. What we need to do as part of our policy plan is to make sure that our planning is realistic within as what we have asked. So this is part of a larger conversation in terms of the work that I'm doing in my portfolio on organizational transformation and accountability, really tracking anything that's been board approved or board directed initiative from start to finish and knowing at what stage they're at in its progress toward completion. It's a critical issue. That is something as a priority for me in the upcoming, or in this particular school year. But I do recognize some of these policies have taken an extensive amount of time, again, for a variety of reasons. When we do come back with the policy review, some of the considerations we can add to the policy is about making sure there are points in which we can do status updates and those type of tracking pieces. in order to assist both the board and the staff toward completion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just another piece, I think, just kind of along the lines of what I think Trustee Shan was saying about having a comprehensive resource somewhere where people can see, okay, this, what phase of policy development are we in? And then what comes after in terms of its operationalization. And I think, because a lot of times I get questions from community, like I say school naming because it's a real hot button at Ryerson. And so the policy is approved, which people know. And then I just keep saying, oh, this procedure will be coming. It'll be coming. So it would be great if there would be something that people could just look up, or that I could provide something tangible that kind of takes it out of, just these conversations that I'm having. And I do think there should be some kind of assessment made. So just for my clarification, and I'm sure this is a bit of a rookie question, but let's say, and again, taking school naming as an example, let's say we don't get the procedure out for another year. Like, I hope to goodness that's not the case, but let's say we don't. We review this schedule annually, right? And so we can always then decide, okay, we don't need to renew school naming in another 2 years, so we can push that one out. Is that correct? We review this annually?
That's correct.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And as both you and Trustee Shan have mentioned about a resource document, let's say, that's tangible, we fully agree. And that's certainly one of the items the policy team and I have been working on, because we are planning to do a very significant change in the way we manage policies. And we do hope to bring something to you very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson. Up next, Trustee Nunziata, please go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you for this report and recommendation. I wanted to ask a little bit about the backlog. It's my understanding that 40% of policies that are to be reviewed are going to miss this cycle. I get it that the consequences of that are trustees get to miss out on getting involved sooner. The policy misses out on opportunities to improve. But are there any ministry consequences? Does the Ministry of Education place any guidelines on how we're to review these policies? And if we miss the cycle, are there any consequences around that?
Through the chair, the cycle is not driven by ministry at this time. It is driven by our own Board of Trustees direction. So a meeting like this talking about the type of cycle and so on. Of course, there are some policies and procedures that do require a specific review cycle because of whether legislation or some other type of reason. But no, not the ministry.
Okay, so just the consequences of us missing some of these policy reviews, it would just get pushed forward to the next one, and there's no other effect that it would have on the policy itself.
Through the chair, just the ones that have statutory requirement to be reviewed. That's the only one. If we miss out on that, there could be penalties under the legislation. However, we're just missing out on meeting our own objectives and our own goals.
Okay,
And so
it's our own goals.
Yeah, when we miss out on our own goals, one thing you learn in business schools that you're going to have to adjust them because obviously we're not being realistic. So this is part of the exercise of adjusting it, in our view, slightly, finding that middle ground where we can still highlight and fast track the ones that require priority, but also making a default being 5 years. And that aligns with many of the school boards that Vitaly Plotnikov and the team have set out in the cover report. A number of school boards have a 5-year review cycle, and I think it's one step toward improvement, but certainly not the answer to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to echo what some of my colleagues have mentioned about better communication around the policies and a high level document for trustees to see. I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Nunziata. Up next, we have Trustee Hastings. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Trustee Hastings here. I have a really big problem about policy. One, because we don't see it in time, as Trustee Nunziata has been saying. And two, Trustee Sen, it goes out of the 4-year cycle. It comes. As been said, we have half of our membership changed, and we're being beaten up on with that. I really don't like to see, and I realize there's no I in team, and I keep being beaten up on that too, that if we go outside of a 4-year cycle, we can't do anything with that. If the government says we got to do, then we got to deal with it then. But I don't want to see a 5-year cycle. I don't want to see a cycle longer than the time that we're in office. And that being a 4-year cycle, I really have a problem with that. I really have a problem with policy because we don't hear about it until too late. I'd like to see a 4-year cycle or less. None of this 5 years, because it's not my problem that you can't deal with it. It is my problem, our problem, 22 of us, that we can't deal with something we don't see, and often we don't see it. And I don't like to go outside of the painting outside of the lines, and that's what a 5-year cycle will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Hastings. Trustee Earhart, you're next. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much. I hope you can hear me. Thanks very much for staff for this report. I had some quick questions. The first question was just because to get me going on GPC is that we receive a policy review that's forward-looking every year for review, which would mean that every year as a committee and as a board, we could put forward reprioritization when presented with the proposed schedule. Is that correct? Just in terms of the sequence of when we as a board would have the opportunity to make decisions for the review schedule?
Through the chair, that is correct. And what we're also going to be providing, excuse me, later on is some criteria in which it can happen if necessary mid-cycle, I guess.
Okay, thank you. So if this evening, or if we vote to support a change from 4 to 5 years, we still have the opportunity every year to move or accelerate specific reviews when presented with the policy review schedule or through board motion at any time throughout the year. Correct. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That certainly helps clarify for me. This is a comment. It would be helpful for me, all the policies, and I so appreciate that we're now at over 80 policies, and we have reduced staff capacity across the TDSB this year in particular due to cuts last year. So I'm very cognizant that this is a large amount of policy that we hold as a board, that there would be a backlog, which would be natural and expected after the significant event of the COVID pandemic and what that has meant to operations of all large-scale organizations, including school boards. So I think I want to say that I think it's very reasonable that everyone's looking at ways to present realistic expectations given staff capacity, to set reasonable expectations for what's achievable. So I just want to express a lot of empathy around that. I hate the idea of putting that things will be reviewed 4 years or 5 years, But if we're only getting to 60%, we should all know that what our capacity is to only be able to review every 7 or 8 years, if I'm understanding it correctly. So I want to express that empathy. It would be really helpful for me to have in the chart where it has the review cycle and it's specified annually every 2 years. If we had like an asterisk or just something that could help us distinguish between what's the statutory requirement for review versus what was a board mandated requirement for review, so that we could better understand what's within our capacity as a board for shifting review just very quickly. Yeah, so I wanted to convey that. I personally have a strong interest in the transportation policy, which was put forward prior to my being elected as trustee. So it was reviewed in 2022. So I see it was placed at the very end. I'll just communicate that while I'm supportive, I am looking for opportunities to accelerate that review, and I'll be considering that this year and in future years. And I'd also be willing to put forward a motion tonight or something in support of what Trustee Arts had raised, if we feel it's necessary, just to look at opportunities to advance the review of the proposal for service dogs, because I do see that it's been listed at 27, 28. So if there were an I would be curious, and I guess that's my question now, for views on what would have to be pushed out further if we were going to bring service dogs up more in the schedule. Thanks very much.
Thank you for those comments. I don't quite yet have a one-for-one strategy for that one, but I do recognize that one in particular should have a shorter or earlier review. And the ones that you talk about, I would maybe ask Senior Manager Joseph Dowers or any one of the governance staff about whether we just simply either amend, so move the schedule with amendments to it and have that recorded by board minutes.
Chair, yes, you can make changes to the schedule now if trustees wish to move that one up. You could do so now during the consideration of this matter.
Through the chair, I'm not sure if Trustee Earhart, you were able to hear that, but, and also Trustee Arts, if you heard that as well, we can entertain the priority ones to move up. And let me just quickly take a look to see if,
Yeah, so thanks very much. I would be interested in moving it, but just in the spirit, I wouldn't want to add it without knowing how it would affect the review schedules. I know thought goes into these review schedules, and we want to try to be as realistic as possible. So I could put it forward, or we could refer back to staff to consider accelerating that, and perhaps that's presented at the next scheduling opportunity. Would that be another way to proceed? Thank you.
But through the chair, another option would be that staff look at this and before it comes back to board, make any necessary changes and present it as a blue folder item at the next board meeting.
I would be open to that as well. So perhaps I'll allow others to comment, and I can get back on the list to move that if that would make sense, and if staff would be willing to help craft the appropriate recommendation for that. Thank you.
through the chair, we can certainly help do that before board. Thank you.
Trustee Earhart, there's no one else on the list. So did you want to make the motion now, or are you happy referring to staff for them to come back at the next meeting with those comments?
Thanks so much, Chair. I think referring to staff to come back would be sufficient. So thank you so much.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
So Trustee Earhart was the last speaker on our list. So we're looking for a mover and a seconder for its staff recommendations.
Sriskandarajah.
Thank you.
Chernis Lynn.
Trustee Sriskandarajah and Chernos Lynn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Earhart in favor.
Aye.
Hastings in favor.
So that was trustees Hastings, Earhart, Turner-Lynn, Shan,
Sriskandarajah in favor.
and Sriskandarajah,
Trustee Nunziata in favor.
and Nunziata.
Madam Chair, Trustee Hastings is not a member of this committee. We need Trustees Earhart, Hassan, Nunziata, Sriskandarajah, and yourself to vote. And of course, the chair and vice chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Nunziata is in favor.
Shan in favor.
Turner-Lynn still in favor.
Give us one moment. We're just having an issue with the scribe.
It says in progress. Based on East Front.
Should we move on? Okay. All right, that has passed. Before we go to adjournment, just wanted to flag the notice of motion presented by Trustee DeVitas and Trustee Hassan. That's up for notice of motion. And with that, we have adjournment. May I get a mover and seconder?
Trustee Hassan.
Sriskandarajah.
Trustee Hassan and Trustee Sriskandarajah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And any opposed?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Have a great evening, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you, Chair.